So, good morning and welcome. I think I introduced myself to everyone. I'm Father Graham. I'm the main priest here in the parish. This is Daniel Tolan, who is a parishioner here, and is also going away to Cambridge for his doctoral studies in religious philosophy. I want to encourage you, there's coffee over here. There's regular coffee in the brown, and you're welcome to help yourself throughout the lecture. Now, please, Daniel, you have the floor. Please share with us your paper on St. Gregory of Nyssa.
So, today's talk is just entitled, What is the Trinity? An explanation of Gregory of Nyssa's Not Three Gods. Thank you all for coming out today. I'd like to start by asking forgiveness for any way in which I might fall short of your expectations or err. It is, however, my hope that this gathering might prove a fruitful time for us to develop a fuller understanding of the riches which our Church has to offer through her divine theology, and that this might spark some discussion amongst ourselves afterwards. The topic of today's talk is the building block of our Church's theology, and it ought also to be the foundation of how we, as Orthodox Christians, live our lives. This topic is the Trinity. St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the three Cappadocian fathers alongside Gregory the theologian and Basil the Great, lived from the year 330 to 395 in Asia Minor, which is known as present-day Turkey. He served for 24 years as the Bishop of Nyssa, and thus is known as Gregory of Nyssa. Beyond being a bishop, Gregory was also a theologian of great acumen, and he was part of the Cappadocian Revolution, which gave Christianity a very robust philosophical foundation. Today, we focus on his work, Not Three Gods, which focuses on the nature of Trinitarian relations. The very title of this work is very telling when it comes to the atmosphere in which Gregory wrote his work. One needn't write a work entitled Not Three Gods unless there were some who were alleging that Christians were worshipping three gods. After all, it seems that the Old Testament goes to great lengths to establish the unity and oneness of God. This teaching might even be summed up in the Shema prayer found in Deuteronomy 6:4, which states, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Yet one must go on to square such a message with the New Testament, which seems, at great lengths, to stress the multiplicity of God. One such example is found in Matthew 28:19, where Christ makes the great proclamation to, quote, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit," end quote. Surely one would not baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit unless all are equally God. Gregory himself gives voice to such attention, noting that, quote, "The force of the question on the surface compels us to accept one of two totally incongruous views. Either we must say that there are three gods, which is blasphemy, or we must deny divinity to the Son and the Holy Spirit, which is irreligious and absurd." End quote. Thus the problem becomes clear. How is one to square the idea of one God with the notion of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? How are these all entirely and equally God if there is one God? The response to such a problem is found in a distinction of nature, or essence, and individual, or in Greek, hypostasis. For example, one might look at Peter, James, and John, who are very clearly three separate men, but they share in one nature, humanity. The same, too, can be said for the number of people in this room. The multiplicity of us does not lead one to speak of various humanities that we all possess. Instead, we are all sharers in one and the same humanity, even though we are all different individuations of the same nature. So, when it comes to the case of Peter, James, and John, it appears the acknowledgement of three persons does not damage the singleness of human nature. Gregory gives two answers as to why Christian dogma excludes the multitude of gods. The first answer is for the simple folk. The answer is that Christians are willing to enumerate persons, but not admit a plurality of gods in order to avoid a similarity to Greek polytheism. I don't, however, think that there are many of you worrying about the Olympian gods on a regular basis, so it would be a good idea for me to move on to how Gregory answers the other people. Gregory's more involved answer turns to the use of everyday language in order to help prove his point. To put this answer in terms of the present talk, it would not seem erroneous for one to say that there are many humans in this room. Gregory, however, is not comfortable with such colloquial language when it comes to the Trinity. Gregory would prefer that one say there are many persons in this room. Such a distinction harkens back to the distinction of Peter, James, and John. These are three persons, but they share in the one and the same humanity. The reason one does not address humans in general is because humanity is a category and not a particular. Talk of categories as opposed to particulars seems to be a slippery slope towards jargon. So let us put this in more tangible terms. Let us say that you should see a friend in a crowd. Would you shout out, "Human"? Or would you try to get your friend's attention by using his proper name? This is the distinction between universal and particular. If one were to see one's friend in a crowd and shout out the cry, "Human," the best case scenario is that everyone in the crowd would turn around because they are all humans. But the other case, and perhaps the more likely case, is that no one would turn around, as the address is far too general to resonate with any one particular individual. I hope now that the distinction which is being teased out is starting to become clear. Human is a universal, which refers to the entire set of persons. Person, however, refers to the individual differences observed in each human. To this end, Gregory notes that, quote, "Nature is one, united in itself, a unity completely indivisible, which is neither increased by addition nor diminished by subtraction, being and remaining essentially one, inseparable even when appearing in plurality, continuous and entire, and not divided by the individuals who share it." End quote. The hope is that at this point the difference between humanity and a person is now clear, as this is an important distinction for what Gregory is going to say about God. Gregory notes his concern that people would think of the word Godhead as a proper name, much the way Peter or Paul might be. Thus, one might come to speak of the Godhead, sun, the earth, or heaven in the same way. But this is not something that we can agree to. The problem with this is that when one talks about heaven, the sun, or earth, one is looking at a particular, namely the specific star that is our sun, or the particular planet that is our earth, and so on. When one speaks of God, or the Godhead, one does not find a particular to be expressed in the name. The particulars of the Godhead are Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If one speaks of God, one is either referring to all three of them, or God the Father, but leaving out the additional predication of fatherhood. There is, however, one further barrier that one runs into when talking about God that one does not run into when discussing earthly matters. This barrier presents itself in the form of knowability. Gregory puts forth the claim that to give a name to something is to stake a claim on knowing the thing essentially. All of creation can be known essentially, but the Godhead, whether it is Father, Son, or Holy Spirit, cannot be known in essence. The reason that God cannot be known essentially becomes a big sticking point when it comes to thinking about God, but it boils down to a fairly simple principle. This principle is that God is infinite, that is neither finite nor limited. Once one advances the claim that God cannot be limited or circumscribed, this extends to all dimensions of God's existence. God cannot fit in this room, much less a shoebox. Yet, at every service one attends, one will hear a clear commentary about God's existence. God is proclaimed to be o pantahu paron ke tapanta pliron, that is, everywhere present and filling all things, a demonstration of how God is in all things. This statement does not, however, make the claim that God is contained by any of these things. The key word here is aperikraptos, that is uncircumscribed. The sentiment of this Greek word can be translated either as circumscription or a literal drawing around, making it a particularly important point for next week's talk on Christology's relation to icons. In this context, however, one is looking at the nature of God, that is to say, God's essence, or ousia. The claim that is being made is that what it means to be God is to be uncircumscribed, because anything that is circumscribed is limited to a space in which it is circumscribed, and this is not befitting of godliness. One distinction in the patristic mindset that is key to understand is the distinction between created and uncreated existence. The entirety of the Godhead, that is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, are uncreated. All other things are created by the Godhead, finding their origination in the Father, production in the Son, and sustenance in the Holy Spirit. Anything that is uncreated can neither be contained nor divided into parts. Anything that is created can both be contained and divided into parts. This is why in the Creed we proclaim that Christ is γεννηθέντα, ou ποιηθέντα, that is, begotten, not made. Even with the Holy Spirit, it is clear that he proceeds from the Father, that is, το εκ του πατρός εκπορευόμενο. To capitulate this, the point being made is that God cannot be circumscribed. Created beings can. Where this fairly straightforward claim gets trickier is in the same way that God cannot be circumscribed physically, neither can God be circumscribed logically or mentally. This is to say that if one is able to think God, as it were, the concept which one is thinking to be God is too small to be God. Just as God cannot fit inside a shoebox, neither can he fit inside our minds. The reason that one cannot think God is that one can only comprehend what is created. The roots of our English words also point to this, as a prefix, com, signifies together, and the Latin root, prehendere, signifies to grasp. The reason that one cannot grasp God is that humans require forms to think. But forms apply only to created beings. So the very categories within which the human mind operates do not apply to God. Thus, when one talks about the substance of created being and the substance of God, one is using the terms equivocally. That is to say, one is using the same word to signify two different things. The essence of created beings can be thought, whereas the essence of God, which is beyond forms, is also beyond thought. This concept is commonly summed up in the notion that God is beyond being. This all goes to say that just as there is substance and person within humanity, the same distinction stands even within divinity, even if the notion of substance is different. Thus, just as there are certain traits common to humanity insofar as humans are humans, whether it be 2 eyes, arms, or legs, there are also common traits across divinity insofar as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are equally God because they exist in a manner which is homoousios, that is, the same substance. Thus, ideas of God and properties of God are proper to all members of the Godhead. Furthermore, Gregory wishes to associate all activities of divinity with the Godhead, and, consequently, all members of the Trinity. He does this by noting that, quote, every operation which extends from God to creation is designated, according to our differing conceptions of it, and have in its origin the Father, that proceed through the Son and reach their completion by the Holy Spirit, end quote. Because all three members of the Trinity share in one action, they affirm the oneness. As such, Gregory notes that, quote, we cannot enumerate three gods who jointly, inseparably, and mutually exercise their divine power and activity of overseeing us and the whole creation, end quote. This unity is to such an extent that, quote, no activity is distinguished among persons, end quote. There does, however, appear to be a deep reason for Gregory wishing to assert that the Godhead should be conceived as an action. This reason is that the Godhead is uncircumscribable. This is to say that one cannot understand God's essence, that is, the Godhead itself, but one can come to understand the actions thereof. Thus, if the divine Godhead is altogether infinite and one cannot conceive of its being comprehended, one must turn to the actions of the Godhead to understand what it is. An example of knowing God through his action can be found in 1 John 4:16, where it is noted that, quote, God is love, end quote. This states that the operation of God, namely the activity of God, is love. Not that God is essentially love. This allows for an insight into God, while at the same time allowing for the divine essence to transcend all circumscription, including the circumscription found in the name. Gregory makes very clear that the essence of God is beyond being, and consequently beyond circumscription. This is a key move because, as he notes, quote, what is not circumscribed cannot be numbered, and what is not numbered cannot be observed in quantities, end quote. Furthermore, if the three persons, what is in Greek known as hypostasis, are all the same substance, there remains one divinity, that is, Godhead. Just as when one makes multiple gold coins out of one piece of gold, there do not become many golds, but many coins out of the one and the same gold. Thus it stands that, quote, no distinction of nature or of operation is observed in the Godhead, end quote. Yet if we have a God who is one in substance and operation, do we truly have a Trinity? Or have we collapsed the three persons of the Trinity back into the notion of one God who is single in manifestation? This could be a problem, were it not for the fact that the three members of the Trinity have different origins. Gregory notes that, quote, the only way by which we distinguish one person from the other is that one is caused and the other depends on its cause, end quote. This distinction, which Gregory of Nyssa is pointing to, is that although the members of the Trinity are without beginning, the Father is the source of the two other members. Thus, the Father is without origin, that is, unbegotten, while the Son is begotten of the Father, and the Spirit proceeds from the Father. Thus, the Father is the co-eternal cause of the other two members of the Trinity. Distinguishing the members of the Trinity by origin works well, because one would never hold that such a cause is identical to nature. John Damascene, an 8th century saint of our church, explains this relation as follows in his work on the Orthodox faith. Quote, in the same way, Adam is unbegotten, because he was formed by God, while Seth is begotten, because he is the son of Adam. Eve too was not begotten, because she was produced from the rib of Adam. Yet they do not differ in nature, because they are all human beings. They only differ in the manner of their existence." End quote. I might add that this is a particularly apt analogy, as one finds unbegottenness, begottenness, and a procession from the rib, the three modes of existence shared by the Trinity in this narrative. On this basis, one is able, without dividing the Godhead, to distinguish between the members on the principle of causality. Yet one must further ask the question whether this has gone too far in knowing the Godhead. Does knowledge of origin stake too great a claim on knowledge of God? This appears not to be a serious problem, as Gregory is saying that the Trinity exists in a certain manner, rather than explaining how the Trinity exists in a manner. Gregory notes, to further defend the orthodoxy of his claim, that knowing whether a tree was planted or does not tell one about what type of tree was planted. So in like manner, knowing the origin of a Trinitarian member does not make a claim on knowledge of the essence of that member. This merely tells one the modes of the member's existence, not what a member of the Trinity is essentially. Accordingly, it seems that Gregory has successfully explained that there is one Godhead, but three persons in whom the Godhead subsists. But how can we now go on to use this as a hermeneutic for life? What does this new knowledge about the Trinity bring to our lives as Christians? In other words, how can we live the Trinity? One way which seemed to present itself to me was that as humans we might try to imitate the love that is Trinity towards one another, but that we must ground our love based on the specific substance which we are, namely human, rather than the specific instances or persons of humanity. In this way, it seems that one might be able to overcome favoritism and rivalry, as love for the other is based on their humanity, not any particular about his or her existence. Another thought that occurred to me is that Gregory places function in substance. So the Trinity is seen to have a common function or action, that is, energia in Greek. This is on the basis of a shared essence. Humans, too, have a shared humanity. So it would stand to reason that we also have a shared function. I do not think I am venturing too far into speculative theology by stating that it seems to be the case that the function of all humans is to be with God, and to be directed towards the kingdom of heaven, and that we as humans must work together towards this goal. These are just a few thoughts I had about the text, but I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say. So I'd like to start with any questions or areas that I had left unclear before opening up for more of a discussion.